again, I really thank you all for being here. I know there's a lot of things right now competing for our attention, and there's a lot going on in the world. And so I think today's session is definitely framed by that context. So being a history, social science person, I can't help but think about everything that's going on right now and how that might impact my teaching and more in particular, like our students' learning, right? So hopefully today can maybe spark some ideas on how you might approach this. Again, a second unprecedented semester of learning and teaching with our students. I do want to give some time and space to check in with the room and see how everyone's feeling. So if you're at a loss for words, like I kind of am a little bit sometimes in these times, this little mood meter might help you grab a word and put it in the chat. So if you don't need that assistance, feel free to type in or unmute yourself and share with us how you're feeling at the current moment. That's good. I'm gonna maybe try and orient myself around some of your all's calmness. This is good. I don't usually get presenters fright, so I'm not sure that's what it is. I feel like some of the butterfly feeling in the stomach might be just around all that's happening in the universe. So I'm glad that most of you are in a calm state. That's good for learning. Yeah, possibly Arthur. Yeah. All right, let's do this. I agree, Steph. Sarah's with me. So it's us history teachers. We're we're freaking out over here. But let's head into this. So today, it's really about the art of asking questions, and there's so many different methodologies that I've seen in my little bit of time being an educator and on this planet. I try to pay attention to a lot of things, and early on in my career, I was able to attend a professional development that I thought was really helpful for that point in my career. Was the art of spiral questioning, and when I took that PD and tried to implement it into my practice, it just became part of my natural kind of style, to the point where I think I got pretty good at defaulting into an inquiry stance with students. And so I remember one year taking on some student teachers at UCLA and having them take over one of my periods, and then going into like more of an observer coacher role. I noticed that they were struggling up at the front of the classroom, and they were attempting to get students to really engage and buy into the subject matter, and the students were, but the student teachers were fishing. I would say they were fishing for a correct kind of answer, or they were looking for students to ask a particular question that they had prepared, kind of at the center of their lesson that day. And so upon debriefing, we were able to reflect on, what they were hearing. They were missing some opportunities. They could have driven the discussion a little further. And so I asked them to observe me the next period and see how long I could go without with just questioning, right? So we did that, and I think I went like 40 something minutes of just like questioning, and they were just like, oh, okay, I get it now. So that was one thing. Today we're going to be focusing more on a particular process called the Q.F.T. process, which I think is suited for distance learning, and we'll be able to experience that, and then you'll have some time to kind of adapt it, modify it, and create some things that you might be able to use even as early as next week. I'm going to go back here and get this link, but that's where that sign-in link is, but now it's also in the chat. And I'm going to play this video, and someone give me a thumbs up or let me know if you can hear this when it gets going.
You know, the idea that questions are becoming more valuable than answers, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but it's actually an idea that's being really embraced these days in Silicon Valley and other areas of other centers of innovation. And the reason why is if you look at a lot of the innovations and breakthroughs today, and you trace them back, as I did in my research, to their origin, a lot of times what you find at the root of it all is a great question, a beautiful question. A great definition I saw for questioning is that questioning enables us to organize our thinking around what we don't know. So in a time when so much knowledge is all around us, answers are at our fingertips, we really need great questions in order to be able to know what to do with all that information and find our way to the next answer.
The real joy for me is that I can take things that are already familiar to you, and by sharing the story of how I've learned to look at them, you can see those things you've been seeing a little differently. So I talk about curiosity-driven research as questions that we try to answer. Why is that tree growing successfully in that place, but never in that place? That's a curiosity question. It's the kind of question a little kid could come up with. Why don't we have those trees at our house? Now, buried in the answer might be something that could give us better fruit someday that we can sell in the marketplace and feed hungry people with. But that result, that application to growing food for people, is buried several steps below that answer. My part of that is to look at that first answer. What is that tree? What does it do? Why is it there? And we call that the curiosity-driven piece because that answer will be basically turned over to other experts who know how that might play out into something that is important for the marketplace. But there's no substitute for that first step, for that little kid question.
The research, a 4-year-old girl is asking like as much as 300 questions a day. And when kids go into school, you see this steady decline that happens as they go through the grade levels, to the point where questioning in schools by junior high school is almost at zero. There are a lot of reasons why questioning declines as we get older. But one of the key issues is that in schools, we really value the answers, and there is almost no value placed on asking a good question. In fact, the teachers now are so stressed to teach to the test and to cover so much material that they really can't even entertain a lot of questions even if they want to. So it becomes a real problem in our school system, in our education system. I think people are starting to address it, try to deal with it. In my research, I found a number of teachers, schools that are trying to place more.
So before we get into the Q.F.T. process, what were maybe some takeaways from that short video for those of you who were able to hear it, and then hopefully we can tease some of the main ideas out for anyone who wasn't able to hear it. Okay. Curiosity, innovation. Sonia, you want to expand on some of those things?
Sorry, I'm just going ahead and typing away.
No.
I like the fact that there's a lot of curiosity, and a lot of people think, when you ask a lot of questions, either they look at you as you being the devil's advocate, or why are you questioning, certain things. But I think it's good to question, and I encourage that in my classes. And it's an inquiry based. I'll read an article. It's like, oh, well, why did you think that? Or what do you think the author was trying to say? And then I post statements, and I'll ask them to discuss and dive a little bit deeper. And what would happen if this, were the case, or what if, and just kind of opening that possibility. You'd be surprised at what some of the responses are from the students. So I think it's awesome, that you're presenting on this, and that hopefully we can kind of see your strategies a little bit more. But that's what I got. I got being, curious, being problem solver. It sparks innovation, and it opens the possibilities when you ask good questions.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. What were others thinking as they were watching the video or hearing some of Sonia's ideas?
I was just thinking that since the world is always changing, no matter what field you're talking about, it's always changing. And so being able to find answers is more important than knowing answers. And asking those good questions is kind of that first initial step to finding those new answers.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the art of questioning, or the natural human disposition to question, is part of our adaptive kind of strategies, right? And so if we're not encouraging or cultivating that, I think it presents maybe some real challenges for how individuals, as well as groups of people, are able to adapt to continually changing environments. It's a really good point. Nora brought up a good question in the chat. Is and the video talked a little bit about just the structure of schooling, right, and the values kind of communicated within the architecture of schooling, not placing as much value on questions as answers, even though we know that questions drive learning. So it would be interesting to see folks who maybe haven't gone through that much traditional schooling, to see if they are asking questions, or what kind of questions they're asking, and at what rate, right? Other thoughts about just the process of questioning, and where it fits in, or how it doesn't fit in into our work? Or any personal experiences? I have one question. How many of you have found yourself ever, or maybe even as of late, lamenting about what might be like a seemingly decline in student curiosity or engagement in the subject matters that you teach? Go ahead, Sonia.
I raise my hand because I'm like, I don't want to mute myself when somebody else does, and I interrupt. But I'm not quite sure I grasp that. Are you talking about like the decrease in questioning strategies, and how that's impacting the engagement in our subject area? I'm not quite sure I understood the question.
I'm wondering if anyone is experiencing, or has experienced in the past, students or groups of students or classes where you kind of you feel like you're creating the space for them to ask questions, but they're just not doing it.
Oh yeah, for sure, all the time. I teach math, so it's like they never want to ask questions. So I have to be the one that guides the questions, right? And I often get the I don't know, and I'm like, okay, so what do you know, right? So I reverse it, like, so what is it that you know already? So you're saying you don't know this, but what do you know about this, or what do you recall or remember from this problem, or what, what does it look, I try to compare the problems to something else that they've seen, previously. And if they still can't recall anything, then I'll direct them and say, well, what about this topic? Does that ring a bell? Does it look like that word, or is in that problem? So then I do a lot of the redirecting. And then I'm also teaching a lower math, level. I mean, it's 8th grade, but still asking them or having them ask a question when we do word problems, like, what do you think, or can you predict? Or what about this situation? What if it was like this instead? Or we would have had this type of problem instead. How would you approach it, right? So just trying to get them to think, a little bit outside. But yeah, no, they definitely, students, that's an area that I feel like I wish I had more time, and I wish I was there in person, because now with distance learning is so hard. Like just even getting them to speak or type is so difficult. So everything has to be so guided. Like I don't think they have that process of creating those questions. So we have to provide those for them.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and distance learning, we're still, still getting the hang of, not only how to kind of assess and measure what, what our students know, like, especially like, can we even see or hear, like, how are they showing us, right? But then how does that move into the next step of how that might inform instruction, right? And to your point, Sonia, and you're getting some accolades in the chat there, I think a lot of us in our commitment to wanting students to be able to develop like their own practices for how to think for themselves, right? And think hopefully in critical ways, if not like disciplinary, like informed ways. We often, when we see this kind of struggle or the pausing where they're just not coming up with anything, we flip automatically into us asking questions, right? And if we're really good at it, we can move their thinking along by prompting them. But I think some of us, or hopefully, like one of our goals would also be to have that not always be the case, and have the questions just be flooded out there, which would then allow us to see, what they're curious about, what they are misunderstanding, and then that could drive instruction as well. And so that's what this Q.F.T. process is all about. It's really about a structured way to help them generate questions and get good at generating questions, and then start to know what questions are actually the ones they want to pursue, and that would help them, meet the objectives that we have laid out through all our courses. So it's a 5-step process, the Q.F.T. process, and it comes from the Right Question Institute, but there's been adaptations in other places as well. And there's a link later on in the slides where you can kind of see. It's definitely open to all subjects. So I'm glad that we have, not just social studies teachers here, but we have math teachers, and maybe you can put in the chat what other subjects you teach, and we'll try to see how we can make sure that you can see how this Q.F.T. process can be used. The first part is focused in on the teacher selecting kind of like a stimuli, right? Or what they call the question focus. And then from there, based on that stimuli, that is what the students are making questions about. And so the second step is really the beginning of them asking questions. And so there's these rules over here on the side where you have to kind of coach them at the beginning, right? It's like you really have to, and for students who've been conditioned to kind of like always look for that right answer, or they know, like by default, they're also asking, they know that they should be asking a right question. At this point in the process, it's like you want them to ask whatever question comes up in their mind, right? And that takes a little bit of coaching as well, but the more you model it and the more frequent you use these type of kind of techniques, then it becomes more natural. So really encouraging them not to like over edit or censor or discuss the question, just throwing them all out there as fast as they can. Sometimes competition is good. in the classroom, like you could maybe some incentives, like which group can come up with the most, or which pair can come up with the most questions about this particular stimuli. And then you record it exactly as it's stated, okay, however it comes out of the brain. And if it comes out and it's not a question, then you can kind of flip it into a question. That's the only kind of, at this point in the process, that's the only edit we encourage. And yes, I think all of these different subject areas and realms you might find some use in this. After you have students produce questions, then you pause and you may come back, you might show some examples. And then eventually, at some point, you're going to explicitly teach how to improve questions. It's like, well, how do you improve a question? There's 2 steps to this, right? Having students understand the difference between closed questions and open-ended questions is a really important part of this step, right? And so after you have explicitly taught that, you've shown, you modeled it, then you also ask them to change or to identify like their own, like how many questions they came up with. And out of those questions, how many are open-ended and how many are closed, right? And I'm assuming that this crowd right now, my audience knows the difference between those 2, but if anyone wanted to just state that real quick so I can check for understanding, or we can build on our collective understanding, we can do that right now. So how would someone define the difference between a closed and open-ended question? Oh, it's right there.
Sorry, I was going to share, but it's fine. I can see it now.
Yeah, I know, right? So if this is not something you've done with students before, again, it's got to be done explicitly and modeled, right? But this helps them kind of like see that there are different purposes for different questions and also different paths to find like answers, right? And that there are questions that don't have one answer, or they have multiple answers. And so then that leads into the kind of higher order thinking skills of argumentation and finding evidence to support claims, things that a lot of us do in the classroom, right? And then all of this is done collaboratively at this point. And then the 4th step is really to help them prioritize the questions that they really want to learn about, and that they can create some kind of plan of attack to try and get some answers, right? And then we come back together and we debrief, okay? Any questions about this 5-step process? I wish it were 3, but it's we're gonna experience it in a second after we see some examples. Okay, so this first example is coming from a math classroom, 5th grade in New Hampshire. It's a Common Core word problem, and here's the problem, right? So math was not my specialty area, and for a while I wasn't struggling as much as I was in secondary, but math is one of those subject areas that has this this myth or allure that only certain people are like capable of mathematical thinking, right? That myth was debunked in college for me when finally a math teacher was able to take that level of math. It wasn't too high of a level, and relate it to something that I was really that I knew a lot about in a certain way, and I was connected to, which was the guitar. So breaking the guitar down into fractions and fractals really helped me understand like a number sense. So this was the question, right? Lots of things in there that a 5th grader might have questions about. So here are the initial questions, right? I love the first one. What are we supposed to do with this, right? But then as they get going, there's some specific questions that automatically let the teacher know there's some things that we might want to go back and help them understand, right? And because it's a word problem, we got to do some vocab, right? Some concept building, right? And even though you're like, well, what does down mean? But down in this context might mean something different, right? So it's not that these students are completely void of knowledge. It's about their knowledge not matching up with the context that they're seeing some of these words in, right? There's a question in the chat. So after the teacher did some vocabulary discussion, here were some more questions that came up, right? Now we're seeing some procedural questions, right? So they are bringing in knowledge, okay? And they're both framing it in ways of like mathematical kind of procedural stuff, as well as like like forming back into like word problem. So you can kind of see how the questioning is helping them to clarify and also engage what they know already about this mathematical challenge. I see some of our folks who are more mathematical, right, are coming up with some additional questions. Absolutely. Here's another example from a middle school history class. And what I want to point out is that while the purpose of the last example was to get kids ready to kind of tackle this Common Core like state test and get those kind of skills to unpack like word problems, which we know students struggle with, the purpose of why you will use a Q.F.T. can range, right? So this one is a pre-reading activity, and to kind of build on kind of like foreshadow what's going to happen in the unit, perhaps get some like a hook in a sense, and then also build on the ability to read primary sources, right, and interpret those sources. And as social studies teachers, we know that primary sources are not like your typical, just reading the textbook. Like they were manufactured in a different time, in a different place for a specific purpose, and we don't have access to that, right? We have to like do some time travel, and we have to read and look at it in a certain way. So that's the purpose of this particular question focus or stimuli, right? So if you take a look at that, and maybe you've seen that image before, or maybe you haven't, but what questions might be popping up in your mind? Here's what some of those students said. I love number 9, right? But that could lead into additional questions. Well, what mechanisms of public safety did they have at that time? What was the setup? And so some of these questions you can see can really lead into like broader themes that like run throughout like the entirety of some of our courses, right? One more history example, because I'm biased and that's my default subject area. Let's go back to number 14 real quick. Yes, right? A classic, and so there is like historical inquiry there, right? But it's also something that students at the middle school level can relate to, right? So, who hit who first? It doesn't matter, right? How do we know that? But those skills of really questioning context and information and how we know certain things, that's very important in a history class. And I would probably argue in all of our classes, right? That level of disciplinary kind of inquiry. And so through the Q.F.T. process, you can start to like get kids better at and more comfortable with asking questions, right? And hopefully lead to like more engagement. One more example. This the purpose was to actually prepare students for debate, right? So again, upper grade level, but moving into those different skill sets of making a proposition and supporting it with some evidence, right? So just a simple picture, okay, that students get to digest as the question focus, and then coming up with some questions here. And so this first step really kind of opens up the space for students to really feel comfortable in like bringing more of themselves into classrooms, right? I think a lot of our students, and it's not that we want it this way, I think it's really just built into the fabric of how school is set up here, and kind of mentioned in the video, like the apparatuses of assessment and, state standards telling us what's important, when really like what's important for a learner, like is what they feel like they want to go learn about, and they don't get to do that until college, right? So Nora, some of the questions are bolded because at that point now, we're going to go into that third kind of that third step where students start to prioritize and categorize, right? So some of these questions are more open-ended, and they're also of higher interest, right? And then Sonia points out that they're definitely a range of DOK, right? The key here is that these are the questions coming from the kids, not the questions coming from the teacher, right? So I want to try this with you all, okay? And I'm going to just put this link in the chat. I'm going to pair you up as well, if you don't mind, with another person. And we're going to start, we're going to give us some time. So this first step is to take a look at this particular question focus, which is Wednesday's insurrection at the US Capitol, okay? And if this is something that is triggering, or you would rather not look at that particular image and come up with a question, I'm going to show you, and you all have access to the slideshow now, but you can also focus on this. So this was the same day on the opposite side of the country in my former hometown of Los Angeles, over by City Hall, okay? And it is also a Trump rally. So what you have here are two images that I'd like you to generate as many questions as you can. And again, remembering the rules, and they're also put on this Google Doc. And then I would like you to do that collaboratively. So I'm going to assign some breakout rooms here. And then we will just have, I think, about 4 minutes to come up with as many as you can now. So give me 1 second. I should probably set the permissions. I'll do that in a second. I can do that right now. Sure.
No, just go to the very top where it says meeting details. There's like a little icon that has a circle, a square, and a triangle.
Oh, I know. I meant
yeah. Okay.
the link for the tool sheet that I have for you all. So, okay. Let's see. Almost got the breakout groups ready. Looks like everyone's paired up. There's one group of 3. So I'm going to open the rooms and I'll start the timer, and then see how many questions you can come up with either stimuli there. Ernesto and Elizabeth, are you all, oh, the link. You mean the link for the document? And are you on laptops, or are you able to join the breakout rooms? I'm gonna try and place you in one. Oh, okay. Thanks, Elizabeth. Hey, Nora.
Hey there, I was in group 6 and got booted out or kicked myself out somehow.
Oh, no. You only have 22 more seconds if you just want to chill here.
Yeah, all right.
How's it going?
All right, yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. It just takes a minute to get set up, and that group had 3 people, so
Yeah, yeah.
logistics of who's doing what and sharing emails and such. By that time, time's up.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
What's that?
Yeah, but I'll just let you know that since I'm not in the classroom right now, I took this because I'm interested in your manner of framing questions for adult learning. So I'm thinking about how to use it with teachers and I guess advisory group, but
Yeah.
just FYI, interested in
Yeah, we can talk about that.
how you
I
form.
mean,
Yeah.
I tend to use similar, you know, tactics with adult learners, especially with teachers, because that it can also model um, things that they could use with their students. I think really it's just more about um, some of the types of levels of questions that you do ask, and then also the pacing, right? And really like recognizing that adults come like value and power kind of laden. And so that needs to be like negotiated differently than it would be in a classroom, right? Because the power is more like concentrated within the role of the teacher. When it's colleague to
Right.
colleague, the different dynamic. But questioning actually, and I mean, I think you've been to adaptive schools a little bit, right?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. Well, the art, like, so questioning in adaptive schools for the art of small group facilitation and collaboration is really powerful, right? So there's different purposes for asking different types of questions. One example that comes to mind is, when a meeting or a PD is being kind of derailed, asking a naive question that the answer to, but will get them to kind of hear themselves in a different way. That's not necessarily to like drive forward like group learning of like a deeper, but it could be to like get to that point, right? And then, or like really broad questions that challenge like some of the assumptions and values that to be held within the group that are not allowing kind of forward progress. Yeah, so I mean, it's also like at the heart of just collaborative work is that authentic spirit of inquiry, right? So it's what I think is one of the 7 norms of like
Yeah, it's exciting. Right away my mind goes to whichever question or thing you're asking us to do. I'm sort of in the middle of it, but what I really want to get out of it is to back up and see from your perspective how you're setting it up, so that I can be more involved in
yeah, if you want, we can set up
myself.
a one-on-one, and you can maybe walk me through an example of like an outcome that you have or like a goal that you want through a certain group or PD, and then talk about like how like a focused kind of question for the group could help you get there.
All right, well, I'll take you up on that. I don't have an exact example right now, but
No, but when one comes up, or
it's
even
good to
if you
know.
wanted to use a past example or something, we could do that.
Yeah, I have to think on it, but all right, I know I got you as a resource, so thank you, Mark.
Absolutely, always. Welcome back, folks. Hopefully that wasn't too disjointing, getting pulled back and forth between breakout rooms and siren timers and what have you. I know there was some time that had to be spent kind of coordinating logistics on a document, but more curious to hear at this point how it went for you, and maybe what kind of questions you all were able to come up with.
I don't know. I just joined. I'm sorry. I got kicked out.
That's okay. We were doing it. We were experiencing what our first Q.F.T. together. So we had 2 pictures from Wednesday's historic events, one from the actual Capitol and one from Los Angeles. And then we were able to partner up or trio up and create some questions. So, would any group or anybody be willing to share some of the questions that you came up with, either by unmuting yourself or dumping them into the chat?
Okay, I can go ahead and read them. I just want to point out that it was difficult for Heidi and I to come up with questions. And I think one of our questions was on that. But we said, how come the police officers and the person buying a hot dog were not wearing a face mask? They're not keeping their 6 feet apart recommended distance. That was supposed to be a question that came out as a comment. Why are the police not armed? Or we didn't see them being armed. And why does it seem difficult to ask a political related question? Because we were struggling with that. And then why are the people inside the Capitol, and who took the picture?
That second, or that last question is a really important one that we often ask when we're taking a critical look at like media production, right? And media literacy, like whose vantage point, why did they take this, like who's outside the frame, kind of thing. Yeah, why are these people gathered? Why aren't they wearing masks? Are we not in a pandemic anymore? I wonder if they're vaccinated. Is there any consequences that there are not for not wearing masks? Right. Here's some questions. Why was there a protest in LA? If you didn't know, if I didn't give you that information ahead of time, where and when would be some questions here. Other questions that you all are curious about? Yeah, the end goal. Absolutely. There's a lot of questions are coming out about this particular event, right? More questions than answers. And I think that's telling also of just kind of like the societal apparatus of like trying to understand really significant events, right? And we're all a part of that, right? So I think from a history teacher's standpoint, and just a teacher in general, since Wednesday and as these events were unfolding, so many questions on Twitter and text threads from colleagues of mine currently here locally, as well as all throughout the state. Just big questions, right? As well as opinions, always our own perspectives as well. But we can start to think about how, with more time and more like practice in collaboratively doing this with one another, how students could really bring a lot of intellectual curiosity, right, to a particular topic or discussion, right? And then what do you want to do with that? Or, what do you want them to do with that? And how can you embed your content and your skills? That becomes part of the planning as well. Before we move on, maybe some other thoughts or any questions about the process or comments about the process?
You mentioned you got this from the Right Question Institute.
Mm-hmm.
That's linked in the slides, right, that you provided?
Yeah, it's it's in the speaker notes, and I think in one of the upcoming slides.
And that template was there, right? Or did you create that template yourself?
This template was created by a colleague of mine who had recently also been trained in the Q.F.T.s and implemented them for the first time last semester with his 9th graders. So I just took that and adapted that, because what I liked about it is that it had the kind of outline the steps of the process in the document, so it was a reminder to them as well. I've seen other ways to organize it, and I can share some other kind of pre-made, mainly history, but like on the website, the Right Question Institute, they have, if you sign up just like with an email to get to be able to access, it's just free and it's just giving your email. They'll allow you to have access to the resources, and so by different subject matter, it looks like this right here. If you can see that.
Yes, I can see it.
And so you can explore by subject matter. You can see what other kind of Q.F.T.s other people have created. Got stuff for NGSS, history, of course, math. So yeah, I'll share that link for sure.
Thank you. I was also going to share that this summer I got this really awesome book. It's called Ask Powerful Questions by Will Wise. And I'm not done with it, but I'm definitely diving deeper into the power of asking questions and how I can incorporate in math, right? So working on that. So this is great. So I really wanted to attend your session. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just with the noting the time, at this point, coming back with the class, you would kind of help them share out and kind of see, like, take stock of all the different types of questions that were being asked, and then send them back or do it together, modify it how it would work to get them to start to improve those questions, right? So some of you mentioned that, you had some statements in there, you would rephrase those into questions, and then you would help them categorize the difference between closed and open-ended, right? Some of these questions have been answered. What were they doing there? What was their purpose? And there were a lot of people there, and they had probably different purposes, but a lot of people have been captured on record, and there was definitely like a organized intent behind this particular event, in both cities. So then we can start to help students see that there is a pathway to find out answers, right? And then we can go down the rabbit holes of, like, what does quality information look like? What is the process of looking for information, right? In our different subject areas. We won't have time to do that today with you all, but then afterwards, of course, you would prioritize your own questions that you really, really care about answering. And this is where that kind of student agency kind of comes in, right? A lot of times students, just the fact that they're not in control of what questions they get to answer, that leads to more disengagement. But I think what I enjoy about the process is that it really does allow for authentic student voice and choice, right? Which we know, like, drives engagement. So I still have the power to select the stimuli, right? And I know, like, through that selection, I know what I'm putting in front of students, and I can anticipate that there's going to be some interest there. But really, based on how they take that, it really creates a more collaborative kind of structure in how to learn. And of course, you always tie in standards and skills-based opportunities later, right? But really starting with what the kids are interested in and what they want to find out can be very powerful. Before we go on break, and then we'll come back for a sandbox so you can kind of play around with some of this, at least as a process. Are there any questions or statements that folks feel like they want to share with the whole group right now?
I'm curious, what does Q.F.T. stand for? I'm guessing Q is question. I missed the F and the T.
Yeah, formulation technique. So again, like, really, the 5-step process of really helping kids form questions, right? They're in their heads, right? We know, like, when we're not super tired and we're not, frustrated with the lack of engagement that we might see with some students, we know that curiosity is there. We know this is sometimes about the matter of awakening it, but like more like structuring it, right? So this is a way to kind of get it out there.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions or comments? So I guess at this point in the process in our SLAM, I should be quiet now and stop being so teacher-centered and allow, number one, for a bio break, and number two, when we come back, it's really your work time. And so whether you want to do that collaboratively or independently, what I'll do is have this open and I'll be around to kind of jump in and out of helping you out. But it's really more for how you might want to take some of these ideas, mull them over, and maybe put some of them to use. The last thing I'll just say is that these are considerations I think have been helpful. Can you see this slide right here? Okay. What you select as stimuli is really important. And so a lot of times when students are struggling with reading and writing in text, I begin in the image base, right? Videos work, I think high interest things is really important. So social media posts, a lot of times you can ask them to bring in something that they found interesting, and then you can use that, right? Maybe you just set like a theme, like, hey, bring in something that you think is math related or science related, and they bring it in, and the process can allow you to most likely create connections. Being clear on your purpose, and also committing to whatever questions they come up with, like you have to use some of them, or you have to allow them to use some of them. So it is a commitment, again, to kind of reshifting the power balance and focus back into like the student realm, right? They're going to guide this a little bit more than maybe some other lessons. The more you do it, obviously, the better they get, right? And the more comfortable you get in terms of like how you structure it and the flow. And then get creative with it. This is the process that the Right Question Institute has kind of put out there. I've seen different teachers use it in different ways, and I've been really, the most exciting thing is always getting a chance to look at the questions the kids come up with. It's just like, they come up with these questions and you're like, wow, they're really thinking deeply about this. They just sometimes need more opportunities to show us that in different ways. And the last thing I'll say is that as someone who's a social studies person, agency is key. And so, especially with like big controversial topics that we just continue to get hit over the head with in the relentless news cycle here in our world today. But if you don't commit to having them use their questions and try to actually answer them, you might be doing more harm there than good. And so at the end, or in the process, there should always be some consideration about like helping students think through, well, what do we do now that we know this, right? Well, what do we do now that we know that, pesticide use is rampant in our community? What do we do now that there's this, there's this tension between, whatever it might be, whatever it is you're discussing, getting them to think about the civic dimension, right? Which is not just relegated to social studies, but I think as recent events kind of have shown us, it's really like education and educators play a foundational role in the creation and sustaining of a democratic society. So, where does the student agency come in after they're, encouraged to ask questions? I see Susanna's hand raised, or was raised.
Sorry, I have trouble manipulating my mouse, but we were really involved in doing our questions, and we didn't come back into the meet until a little bit later. Sorry, and maybe you already covered this, but as far as when you're helping them to come up with questions, do you give them sentence frames or samples of how to start questions? Would you recommend that? And then how do you go about showing them how to flip a statement into a question? I think that's like a whole process in itself. Yeah. Anyway, that was my. Maybe cover that.
It is for sure. Depending on your students and where they're at, Susanna, and in middle school, I know that we sometimes front load more. So we anticipating that like kids might struggle with turning a statement into a question. We might have a mini lesson like ahead of time, right, on that. I would not recommend giving sentence starters for this particular process as is, right? I think if and I'm going to share something in the chat with you. So let's say you want to like cover, if your purpose is to get them to understand how to engage with like current events and news sources more specifically, then you might give some question stems, right? Or you might say, next week we're going to really get good at asking our own questions, but I want you to go through our textbook and see all the different types of questions and see how many you can find, right? And see which ones you like the best. So it's not like they're unfamiliar with questions, but this process is really like trying to free it up as much as possible before you start to like constrain it and refine it and structure it more, so that they get the message that even like a question that you're not going to stick with like as the focus, it gets you to those other questions, right? So the more you put out there, the more the more you have for like source material to kind of whittle down to find that right question, which is why I guess that institute is called The Right Question. This is really an important part of like kind of iteration and innovative design. So like the video that you didn't get to hear at the beginning, talking about like the Silicon Valley, that's the only center of innovation. But a lot of those people who are working in like tech, they throw out a lot of questions, and they're okay chasing the question down until they recognize it's not, maybe that wasn't the right question, but they had like a whole list of other ones. Let's go back to that question. Maybe that's the better question. So,
okay.
That makes sense?
So not necessarily maybe question starters or stems, but maybe like you said, to have them find our questions, identify questions that are already being posed, and then perhaps providing them with like a bank that they can use, and then that they have to tweak to get to the question that they want to create. I don't know. Like how do you ask a question about people thinking? How do you ask a question about, how do you, start your why question, or how do you start a where question kind of thing? I guess is what I was getting at.
I think the big 5, or I guess 6 with how, right? Like you could always start with that. Like see how many why questions you can have, see how many where, like, like you could, that could be like just enough to get them going if they're like really kind of hesitant. Beyond that, I think like it would be like once they get past that and the kind of apprehension of asking questions, then like sentence stems and more focused kind of questions or like types of questions become helpful when you're going like even deeper into a dive, right? So like, hey, I want you to come up with 10 economic questions right here, or 10 like cultural or political questions, like using other kind of frameworks to help out. Those are all good points. Yeah. Any other questions before we hit the break and then we come back for just some work time? Awesome. If any of them come up, let me know, and you can always we can always meet or discuss later outside this session. I really appreciate you sticking with me and being here today. I hope some of this was useful, at least right now, and when we come back, we'll make it more useful. But let's get off the screen for a little bit and bio break for 15 minutes and go take care of yourself, and we'll see you when you get back.